Hello guys, and this is Scott here, and today I've got another historic video for you, and in this one I've been asked to have a look at a very wet spell of weather between October 1929 and January 1930. Now, as I said, this was an extremely wet spell of weather that was quite a surprise because it came after what was up until that point a very dry year. There was some extreme flooding in November and December of that year, but as I said, it really kicked off in the October. So just before I get started, I'm just going to say that many of the facts and figures that you hear in this video come from Trevor Harley's personal weather website. He has detailed pieces of information, weather information, going back to the start of the 1900s, and even smaller fragments of information going back further than that. And many of the charts that you see in this video come from wetterzentral.d. They have a fantastic archive of charts that goes back to January of 1871. So as I always say, if you want to request a historic video, you can pick anything really from the start of 1871. And another thing, if you have made requests, I will get round to them. I do take on board every request I get. But I don't do them very often simply for the fact that I don't want to run out of notable weather events too quickly. So that's just something for you to bear in mind if you're a bit concerned that I've actually not listened to you. Well, I have done, it's just, yeah, I don't want to use them too quickly. So that aside, we're going to start on the 10th of September 1929. And this was a very warm and dry month, in fact. September 1929 actually has a central England temperature of 15.2. And the pattern I'm going to show you here just pretty much sums up what was the case of most of 1929. There was a lot of anticyclonic influences, not necessarily warm in other parts of the year, but in September it was warm anticyclonic. So there we are on the 10th, and pretty much we've got high pressure through the country. And really that stays through the 14th and into the 18th of September. You notice that the jet stream, which is indicated by that black line there, is well to the north of the country. We have low pressure right up to the north of Iceland, so it's well away from the UK. And that goes into the 22nd and the 26th of September. However, as we move towards the end of September, this is actually where the very wet spell actually got going, and it was very, very sudden how it happened. Because as we go into the 29th, you can see that the jet stream is running to the north, but that high pressure is starting to collapse away into Eastern Europe. So as we go into the 30th, you can see that that black line is very slowly starting to move south. And that basically means, the jet stream's moving south, and it's all of a sudden going to open up a very wet and stormy October. So as we go into the 1st, you can see that the jet stream's pretty much running through the country. And you can see that elongation in the isobars there, which indicates we're bringing a weather front into the country. So October 1929 pretty much is wet from the word go. And this month has a central England temperature of 9.6 degrees. So this was a really cool and wet month. It was much wetter than average, in fact. And it really does just mark a huge contrast to the rest of 1929. So we have that weather front moving through the country on the 1st. And as we go into the 2nd, we all of a sudden bring a very deep area of low pressure into the country. So this brings severe gales to a vast majority of the country. It's a complete contrast to, the mid-20s and sunshine that we had through the most of September. And as we go into the 3rd and the 4th, we just keep it very wet and unsettled. And at the time though, this would have been quite welcome rainfall, especially after the dry year. But as we'll find out as we go through the charts, whenever you wish for wet weather in this country, you might want to think twice, because by the end of this spell, they were certainly thinking very differently. And all of a sudden then, as we go into the 5th, we're bringing another area of low pressure in, and we get some very severe weather here throughout this early part of October. So as we go through the 6th and into the 7th, we see severe gales across the country. And in fact, between the 5th and the 8th, we actually record 92-mile-an-hour gusts at Falmouth and 110-mile-an-hour gusts on the Isles of Scilly. So, you know, the classic wet and windy sense of autumn is really charged in by this point. And that goes on into the 8th and the 9th of October. Before by the 10th we do try to bring high pressure through the country, but it really is only a very fleeting spell, because it builds through the 11th and into the 12th of October, and again into the 14th, but already by the 16th you can see we're bringing in the next area of low pressure off the Atlantic, and this is again bringing heavy rain across the country. And that goes into the 17th and the 18th of October 1929. And you can see now that that high pressure's actually moved itself into the mid-Atlantic. So this has put us under more of a northwesterly airstream now. So we've lost, you know, the average temperatures of early October, and now we're bringing in some relatively cool air now. So this explains the low CET for this month. And the winds actually go a bit more northerly as we go into the 19th and the 20th of October. So this brings some really cool weather into the end of the month. And that goes into the 21st and the 22nd of October. You know, the jet stream is running right through the country. It's just very wet and very windy. Into the 23rd and the 24th of October. And now you can see actually that those blue colours are starting to show in the North Atlantic. And when you get that, that's usually a sign of some very severe gales to come, especially in the winter. Because that's basically the polar vortex in the stratosphere. Very cold air in the upper stratosphere. And this basically means now that very cold air is moving into the Atlantic. And this causes a huge contrast, which basically fires up the low pressure. Hence the wind. And really that just gets more severe into the 25th and the 26th of October, so we're bringing more rain bands through the country. So it really was quite a miserable month, but you know, it's not, the worst is still yet to come. And into the 27th and the 28th of October, we actually again try to build high pressure through the country. And into the 29th we bring this area of low pressure in, before into the 30th and into Halloween of 1929, we actually get this little ridge of high pressure. And that takes us into the start of November 1929, and this is where it really kicks off. You know, October was a very wet month, but when you look at November, October actually seems like a fairly decent month compared to this. November 1929 has a central inland temperature of 6.7 degrees, which is about average actually, but the rainfall for this month is very far from average. In fact, this was the wettest November of the 20th century. And in fact, Ross on the Wye actually records 227 millimetres of rain in this month. And even more impressively, Princetown in Dartmoor actually records 747 millimetres of rainfall. So that is absolutely unprecedented amounts of rain. And because of that, basically, there was a lot of flooding, which goes without saying in this month. So really, we have that high pressure through the country on the 1st, but that quickly starts to decay away as we go through the 2nd and into the 5th of November. As you can see there on the 5th, so bonfire night, we were bringing up quite a blustery southwesterly there. So we were bringing rain bands through the country. So this was a very classic wet and windy bonfire night. You know, more akin to what we would expect at this time of the year. And as we go through the 6th and into the 7th of November, basically the pattern just starts to get more severe. The areas of low pressure in the Atlantic are rapidly deepening, and as we go into the 8th we bring quite a deep storm in then off the Atlantic. So this brings yet again more severe gales into the 9th and the 10th of November 1929. And actually on the 10th there you can see that we've got a weather front strung out across the country. And that basically stalls over the country. And on the 11th, this next area of low pressure in the Atlantic actually catches up with this. So this actually causes an extremely wet day on the 11th of November 1929. And in fact, in just the 24-hour period on the 11th, we record 211.1 millimetres of rain at the West Reservoir. Which is again absolutely unprecedented flooding rainfall, absolutely extraordinary, and this was one of the wettest months ever recorded at the time of this. And it just carries on into the 12th and the 13th really. We just keep very deep areas of low pressure around the country, high pressures out in the mid-Atlantic, so to make it even worse we're actually under quite a cold airstream there. So it's just very cold, very raw, blustery, and absolutely tipping it down for this entire month. So it must have been absolutely horrendous. Into the 14th and the 15th of November, it just carries on, and we bring another very severe gale in on the 16th. You know, look how tight those isobars are. Into the 17th and the 18th of November. You know, on the 19th again we're just bringing another severe gale in off the Atlantic. The rainfall totals are now becoming critical, because even though up until October this was a dry year, we'd had that wet October and now we were having a record-breakingly wet November. Into the 20th and the 21st, in fact we get some very mild air. As you can see, the isobars, if you follow them there, actually come all the way from North Africa. So there was actually reports of Saharan dust at this time of the month, as well as copious amounts of rainfall. And into the 22nd and the 23rd, just again very cyclonic influences. You know, high pressure is over Eastern Europe, it's well away from us, so it's not affecting our weather at all. And in fact, basically where it is, it's just stalling those weather fronts over the UK. So again, it's just making it unprecedentedly wet. Into the 24th and the 25th, we get another very severe gale on the 25th. And actually, this was a photo on the 25th of November 1929 from Monmouth in South Wales. And it just sums up what they were going through at the time. Just extraordinary amounts of rainfall, and the flooding waters were just rising all the time. So again, the situation was becoming critical by this late stage of November. But again, it just refused to relent, because as we went into the 26th and on into the 27th of November, we just kept the same old pattern: high pressure to the south, low pressure to the north, and we're just bringing in copious rain bands off the North Atlantic. Into the 28th and the 29th, and that's where we finish off November really, with again another area of low pressure preparing to move in off the Atlantic. And that takes us into December. And did the change of season make any difference? In fact, no, it didn't. And if you thought November was horrid, can you believe December was even worse? Can you believe? December 1929 was actually a very dark month actually. It has a central inland temperature of 5.8 degrees, and it was described as extraordinarily stormy. And in fact, the darker side of this month actually comes from the fact that there were dozens of people killed both at land and at sea. You know, many ships capsized in this month out at sea just because of the sheer intensity of the winds. And on land, people again were killed by the strong winds and the flooding that occurred in this month. You know, so it really was no laughing matter at all this month. So there we are on the 1st of December 1929, so the first day of the winter of 1929-30. And again, there's just absolutely no change at all. Areas of low pressure just queuing up in the Atlantic and getting ready to affect the UK. And that's actually a photo on the 1st of December. This is actually of a steam train in Somerset, I believe this is. And actually you can see there's the conductor of the train actually stood in the middle of the railway, and the water's actually all the way up to his hips, so it really was pretty significant flooding. But it was only going to get worse, I'm afraid, because as we go into the 2nd of December, we're bringing another area of low pressure off the Atlantic again, and that comes in on the 3rd, and we actually develop a really deep area of low pressure there on the 3rd, 945 millibars out in the North Atlantic. So that really is an exceptionally low air pressure. And as we go into the 4th, actually, we bring some heavy thunderstorms across the country. So again, this just exacerbates the flooding. And in fact, December 1929, as well as being a very windy month, was actually quite a thundery month as well. The 4th actually just saw some of the many instances of coastal thunderstorms, which, again, just exacerbated the flooding, made it a lot worse. And as we go into the 5th, look at that storm there on the 5th. Extremely tight isobars, and the air pressure there is lower than 940 millibars, so that's an absolutely extraordinary storm. And at the time this hit, this was one of the lowest air pressures ever recorded in the UK. So, again, just an absolutely phenomenal start to the winter. And that went on into the 6th and the 7th, and again we bring another extremely severe gale in on the 7th, and again this brings more thunderstorms. So, the situation was absolutely dire by this point. I bet people were just absolutely praying for this to end, but, it didn't for the time being, as it carried on into the 8th and the 9th, and into the 10th of December. Again, there was more exceptional rainfall on the 10th, and into the 11th of December. And as we go into the 12th, again, another area of low pressure comes in off the Atlantic. But by the 13th, high pressure actually tries to have a go. And actually, the middle part of this month actually wasn't too bad. As we go into the 14th and the 15th and into the 16th of December, we actually bring this temporary ridge in, which does bring some quieter and calmer weather. But it was only temporary, because as we go through the 17th and the 18th and into the 19th of December, that area of high pressure is already starting to retreat back into Eastern Europe, and it's pretty much the same old story really. The high pressure's collapsing away and the jet stream is moving back southwards over the country. So again, we're letting the Atlantic in. So by the 20th, we're back to the same old story again really. Wet and windy for the foreseeable future. And we bring another exceptional storm in on the 21st, again some extremely tight isobars. And actually as we go into the 22nd, that area of high pressure that actually brought us that settled spell actually turns on us, because you can see it just hovers around parts of Western Russia. So it's at that point where it's too far east to actually deliver us any significant cold, but again it's just in the right spot, or the wrong spot, however you look at it, to basically just block those Atlantic weather systems over the country. So all these Atlantic systems stall over the country once again, producing absolutely copious amounts of rainfall. So it's an extremely wet run up to Christmas, into the 23rd and into Christmas Eve itself. We bring another area of low pressure through the country before we get a severe storm actually on Christmas Day, and this brought storm force winds to Scotland. In fact, again, we had wind speeds going up over 100 miles an hour over the northern half of the country. So again, another volatile weather system in this late autumn into early winter period. And into Boxing Day, it remains the same, into the 27th and the 28th, and pretty much this is how we finish off 1929. Into the 29th and the 30th, we're bringing more rain bands through the country and into New Year's Eve. And what was remarkable is even with that high pressure spell in the middle of December, this was still one of the wettest Decembers on record. So, you know, an absolutely extraordinary month. And then we move into the start of the new year, and did 1930 bring a change? Well, not at first, I'm afraid, because the extreme rainfall actually continues into January 1930. Now, rest aside, this month was nowhere near as bad as November and December, but it was still a very wet and mild month. This one has a central inland temperature of 5.6 degrees, and again it was another wetter than average month. So there we are on the 1st and into the 2nd, and again we're bringing another area of low pressure off the Atlantic. You know, I'm very much repeating myself in this video. Into the 3rd and the 4th of January, again just more unwanted rainfall by this point. You know, it really is a critical situation. Into the 5th and the 6th of January, onwards into the 7th and the 8th, you can see high pressure is well to the south again and into Europe. It's nowhere near the country, so for the time being we stay wet. And into the 9th again, the jet streams diving well to the south of the country, bringing more rain bands in off the Atlantic. And that carries on into the 10th and the 11th of January before we get another extremely severe storm there on the 11th, which is down to 950 millibars with extremely tight isobars. So again, this brought 100-mile-an-hour plus gales across quite a wide area of the country. Into the 12th and the 13th of January, again another severe storm on the 13th. And as we go into the 14th, then we actually develop a very mild spell. You can see those isobars actually swing round into the far southwest, so this is quite a long fetch southwesterly. And as we go through the 15th and into the 16th of January, we actually record 16 degrees in Chester, and other temperatures into the mid-teens across most of England and Wales. But this was actually quite a pleasant day, because it was very mild and we were actually in a break in the isobars there, so excuse me. This was probably quite a welcome day at the time. But it didn't last long again, because another area of low pressure came in on the 17th, though this one did actually get a bit blocked actually by high pressure over over Central Europe, so Germany and Denmark. But again, that high retreats into the 18th and the 19th, so again we're bringing more wet and windy spells in off the Atlantic, into the 20th and the 21st, and into the 22nd as well. However, we are close to this spell starting to relent now, because as we go into the 23rd and the 24th, we bring this one last big storm through, but this starts to shift away to the north onto the 25th of January. And as we go through the 26th and into the 27th, and onwards into the 28th, you can see we actually slowly start to build this ridge through the country now, and the low pressure is gradually being blocked further out into the Atlantic. So into the 29th and the 30th, we bring another rain band through, but the high pressure is very slowly starting to win the battle. And into the 31st, you can actually see we're starting to build it over Scandinavia. And this was actually where the very wet spell ended. But I'm sure you are curious as to where the rest of the winter went. And in fact, February 1930 was actually quite an anticyclonic month, so this was obviously a very welcome relief after this very wet October to January period. And it was a very cold month as well, actually, with a central inland temperature of 2.5 degrees. So we'll quickly whiz through the charts for February. So that's the chart for the 3rd of February there. And as you can see, we actually are building high pressure to the north of the country. And as we go through the 7th, this actually puts us under quite a chilly northeasterly wind. So winter actually finally arrives in February. And then that high pressure then builds through the country into the 11th of February and into the 15th. So again, we just finally get some more in the way of winter. And into the 19th, again, that high pressure just sits just to the east of the country, so we're bringing in an easterly wind there. And into the 23rd and the 27th. So there was I don't think it was necessarily a snowy month, though that chart on the 27th actually looks quite snowy. But you know, it was such a relief finally after that extraordinarily wet October to January. And I bet the jump for joy when this actually happened. But yeah, that's my little look back at the very wet spell between October 1929 and January 1930. And again, if you've got any requests for historic videos, leave them in the description below, or like send me a message on Twitter, whichever you feel. So thanks for watching this historic video, and I'll see you sometime in the future.